Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the Monday, April 29th, 2024 Barrington Select Board meeting. Call to order.
Hardikoff present.
Capiello present.
Gibson present. And invite you all to rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge of allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. Agenda review. I know we had one agenda.
Yeah, we have an echo.
Oh, we're echoing. So I'd make a motion to add onto the consent agenda item C.
I second that.
Hardikoff, aye.
Rookie.
Capiello, aye.
Gibson, aye. All right. Motion to approve the agenda as amended.
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda as amended.
And I would second that.
Roll call.
Hardikoff, aye.
Capiello, aye.
Gibson, aye. Okay, we're going into public comment. I would like to invite anyone from the public in person or online to share a 3-minute comment.
And Mr. Chair, will you be holding a separate comment for many of the members in the public are here for the Ayers Lake? Will we have a separate comment section then? Or
we were debating that. We had done that prior to, and so we felt like everybody had spoken for the record. So certainly welcome to speak now in this public session and at the end. I don't know that we needed to again during the have our discussion. It may be depending on how many people we have here, more of just a discussion too. So very good.
So I guess the question is, if you're here to speak on the topic of the boat launch on Ayers Lake, do you want them to speak now?
Yeah, I would invite people to speak now.
Yeah, so there's be an opportunity for that.
I'll do the timing too.
Good evening. My name is Matt Town. I live on Stillwater's Way on Ayers Cove Drive as well on Ayers Lake. As you probably remember, I spoke last week, but a thought that occurred to me that I want to kind of land on tonight was that we have paid great attention, as we should, public access. And as somebody who grew up in the lake, I'm quite mindful that public access to Lake Sunapee was what I was all about. As a young adult growing up. I also want to emphasize that those of us who live around the lake and who have been fortunate to gain property there, we also have rights. And I might suggest that we have an inordinate amount of exposure. What happens to that? That lake that has milfoil experiences a 1:1 relative study, 19% reduction in property value. So in my particular case, that would drop the price of my house by $200,000. For most of us, our wealth is tied up in our house, big debt, if you will, and not really necessarily stocks, bonds, and the like. So if you invested heavily into your houses, case in mind, I think others, having that drop in income affects our retirement, affects children, it has real consequences. When you couple that with the notion that we around the lake really care for that lake, and I don't mean just in an emotional sense, but in actions. Have a weed washer that periodically goes out and we look for invasive plants. Thankfully, to date, we haven't found any. We've had somebody question and send them off to be analyzed. We also test the water 2 to 8 times a year at our expense, just to keep track of what the salinity and might happen on that lake. And I think I speak for the rest of the residents that we all do our share of lakefront salvages, rescues.
I'm sorry, say that one more time.
Rescues of the public. They get out on the lake, they don't really know what they're doing. I rescued one guy that was in a giant floating tube. He was fishing out there, and his tube tied the leak. To say the least. So, but we do that, and we're not, asking for great accolade. All I'm saying is that our presence on the lake makes that lake function better. And if we like at least a due diligence reference. That comes up in the fact that we have an outsized exposure as opposed to the general public. If the lake becomes infested, the general public move on to another lake and just abandon them. Can't do that. Have that luxury. That's it. I'll use the next.
Good evening, folks. My name's John Bennett. 27 Waterway. My wife and I are avid kayakers. Been on a lot of different. And one thing that we found in common amongst all of them is that those with easily accessible boat launches, power boats, they all have extensive. I've been on some bodies of water, kayak on it. Really not practical to even have, we've been to lakes that had a person there looking at them. But even that, you get little pieces of milfoil, trailer, all stuck within the engine. It spreads very rapidly. As Matt said earlier, I'm in favor of getting out there and kayak. I have seen that water, and especially somebody's over in Swains Lake, which already has a significant mill, and she stops and they decide to take their boat out and hop over to Ayers Pond. There's a good likelihood that they may be.
Anybody else in person, or if you're online, you can raise your hand.
Just to echo Camp Fireside's
Your
position.
name and address.
Oh, I'm very sorry. Robert Lyons, Executive Director at Camp Fireside, Pond Hill Rec. Just to echo what I spoke on last week, Camp Fireside's position is supporting public access to the lake, but in a responsible manner. So an area that could be accessed by kayaks and paddle boards and such, we support. However, we don't want to open it up even further risk. And having a larger boat ramp or boat launch, I feel would increase the amount of traffic down there, would increase the access and the risk of the lake becoming something that wouldn't be beneficial to us as those who live on the lake and those of the town in general. Thank you.
If you're online, now would be a good time to raise your hand, wait to be called on. There'll be another opportunity at the end of the meeting for public comment. Is that light green? Oh, can you press the one button on it till it turns green?
There we go.
Awesome, thank you.
So my name is Michelle Meister. I also live with my husband on Ayers Lake. And all of us obviously care very much about the beauty of the lake, and also that it's, it stays safe. In reading, I've been kind of trying to read through some of the other, memos and things that you have really discussed in great detail. But I was a little confused because it appeared that somehow we were requesting a larger dock, and I know that the committee really, that's not the case for us. So, we just all try to be, I'm on the weed watchers committee too, so we all really do try to honestly take care of it. But, we just aren't looking for something bigger on that. We just want to make sure that people can use it and that it stays really at the place that it is. So thank you. I appreciate it very much.
I have to push this button.
Well, is it green?
Okay.
As long as it's green, you should be good.
My name is Andy Blaze, and I live on Stillwater Way. And I also have property on the lake. But I guess I'm one of those people who believe that, you know, I realize that any body of water of 10 acres or more is really state-owned, you know. And of course, if it's, and I think everybody has a right in a town to enjoy that lake or pond, you know, as best they can. But it has to be done in a responsible way. I see some of our ponds are got plenty of milfoil, and it's a disaster, you know, in that sense. I mean, it still can use it, but it's not anywhere near what Ayers Pond is. I guess my fear is that we need to give access, but we need to do it responsibly. If you're going to just be irresponsible about it, then we're going to go down that same path that some of our other lakes and ponds have gone down to. And that's where I, for one, would obviously do not want and object to. But I enjoy seeing fishermen on the lake, you know. I talk to them a lot, and I think they have every right to be out there fishing and enjoying the lake as well. I don't think it's a lake that can, you know, it's not big enough to be a Winnipesaukee, have all the speedboats of that size and so on. I really love the lake. When canoes and kayakers are the predominant feature there, you know. And I think that's a big plus for the town. And I'm hoping that I don't know, the powers that be will take that into account, that there is some value there. There's plenty of value. We don't want to lose it. That's all I got to say. Thank you.
Diane St. Jean, Small Road. There was some talk last time about Lake Host program, and so I looked it up, and I know that they are very active and it's a good group, but to apply for a grant for Lake Host, the application deadline was April 1st. So if this launch were to go in, or regardless of what happens, we could not apply for a grant for this year. And the paid positions that they provide with the grant money really only go to the 100 most used boat launches in New Hampshire. So I don't think we would be eligible for that. The other option is volunteer lake hosts. I think that would be very hard to find, and it would be very difficult for them to do the job if we were to be able to get volunteers to do it, because their whole process is about inspect, clean, and dry. And there's really literally no place where they could clean and dry. They might be able to inspect, but they certainly can't clean and dry, drain a bilge or anything like that. So we are very concerned about the possibilities, as other people have said, of introducing aquatic invasive plants or animals. And I think the defense is, it feels like it's only us, you know, with our Weed Watcher program. So I just want to make a note that although I think the Lake Host is a wonderful program, I don't know if we would really be eligible for that.
So I'm taking two dip here. I have one comment.
Point of order.
There'll be another session at the end. Yeah. Any others? Okay, we'll close public comment. Public hearings and invited guests. School board? Yeah.
They're both showing green too.
Hello.
Hello.
Good evening. Thank you for having us again. I know that Rick was here last week, and so I don't know how much more updates I think that we have from a calendar week, especially where school was on vacation. But I don't know if Rick wanted to add anything.
Not unless you have any questions for us. But we're pushing the high school forum on May 9th at 6:30 at the middle school. For the people out in the audience that are watching this online, this is a community event. It doesn't involve just parents of kids that are going to go into high school, but it certainly, as taxpayers, you have a say in education's expensive, tuition's expensive. So it's an opportunity to come in and see what the different schools offer our students as they try to make a decision where they want it, the direction they want to head in life. So certainly we'd like to fill the space with interested people. Right?
Yes, and it's even if you aren't specifically looking from a tax purpose, although probably you are if you don't have children and are coming to a meeting on May 9th at 6:30 p.m. But I will say what's really interesting is understanding how different education, especially as you get closer to higher education, has changed so much. So I don't want to age myself, but it has been quite a while since I've been in school, especially in undergrad. But it is so different. Not even just the services that they offer, but even the extracurriculars, the relationships with local colleges, the opportunities for work study. All of these opportunities are so different than what I had allotted to me. And I think it's just would be great for anyone who has the time and is interested to learn just about how much education in New Hampshire has changed.
Do you get the sense that this is kind of like an open house event where all three of the different schools approach it in the same way, that they're all equally excited to bring Barrington students?
Definitely.
I had a question like, how much do these other towns appreciate and enjoy?
Oh, sure.
Arrangement, right?
From my experience, I've been to we have joint meetings with each of the schools every year, individually, not all as a group, of course. And they always give Barrington students high praise, our community high praise. They always, of course, have feedback that we can loop in. But behind the scenes, there's a lot of work that's done between our middle school departments heads and then also the high schools to make sure that we're consistent with curriculum, that we are preparing our students in the best way possible. Like a simple thing I never would have thought of before being on the school board was level of homework. Are we preparing our students for that workload when they get to high school? It's very different, just like from 4th grade to 5th grade in our community. It's a big step. And so that's been a big topic of discussion that we've appreciated working with them on. But they always are very, very appreciative of what we can bring to the table, especially from sports perspectives and extracurriculars. We have students almost every meeting, maybe not during when there's finals and things like that, but from each of our high schools that represent their high school and come and speak at our meetings to give us just a lowdown on what events are going on. Again, from sports to extracurriculars to end of year activities, I think is really great. It's usually a junior, and then they follow along to senior year, which is also great to see their development.
It's great. I hear a lot from residents how much they appreciate and like the arrangement. I was just curious how it was on the other end.
Yeah, and it's very different. When I first moved to the community, I can speak as just a citizen for a moment, but I did not understand school choice. I came from a community that I lived in Rollinsford and we didn't have a high school, but I was able to go to St. Thomas and Dover. And so to me, it didn't make sense that there was a choice unless it was a private choice. I didn't understand that. And then as soon as I got involved in school and had children, I got to see the 3 high schools and how different they are, but in the best ways possible. They serve our students well and their specific needs. But even that, I think students are more prepared for making a college decision if they choose that route because they're already used to maybe separating from students that they already know, making decisions about their future. I mean, when you don't have a high school choice, the first time you think about your future, on a trajectory, is senior year in high school. But our students get the benefit of doing that in 8th grade.
It might also be interesting, I've seen in the news, at least a couple of districts we send to have declining enrollment.
Yes.
And so the tuition of students in not only helps financially, but helps with their school population. It might be interested, I don't know if the districts aggregate those numbers of their enrollment, kind of like Barrington does. I know Deanna does a great job every year, deliberative, doing projections. But some of the numbers that have been reported in the news are pretty staggering about the loss of students in those other districts. So I feel like at some level, that's got to make Barrington's kids going to their school districts a lot more
specifically
attractive.
Durham at this point right now.
Okay.
Yes,
Yeah,
they would probably be one of the one of the communities high on that list. So yes, it was mentioned in our last group meeting. But I'll make a note that after maybe towards the end of the year, we can provide some sort of detail and reporting to share with not just you, but also the community on those numbers. Absolutely.
Thank you.
And I wanted to just make a comment. So when I was select board liaison, one of the things that had struck me that I thought was excellent from the SAU perspective was speaking with all of the administration for the 3 high schools, all the way back to making sure we're prepping our middle schoolers for what they need. You know, specifically, how do we get the math numbers up? How do we make sure that they're ready for the level of reading that they'll encounter should they choose
foreign language choice, right?
So it was fascinating to see that, you know, back it up 6 years and you're already talking about how each of those students will need to prepare so that when they do make that choice, they're ready for it. So that, I found that portion of the collaborative efforts amongst all the schools fascinating.
Oh, thank you for saying that. I agree.
Great.
Well, I'm sure we'll have more to update you on the next meeting.
Thank you.
But thank you.
Thank you.
So moving on to the consent agenda as amended. Any questions? Do we have a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda as amended.
And I would second that. Well, Hardikoff, aye.
Capello, aye.
Gibson, aye. Okay. On to appointments.
An exciting section tonight.
Wrote down the date. What time is the high school forum?
May 9th. I didn't get the time.
I got May 9th. Do you remember what time?
I can tell you.
Okay.
So the first one for the planning board alternate is Scott Shepard, up for discussion.
6:30 to 8:30, Tracy.
Okay, thank you.
So Scott Shepard has applied to be an alternate on the planning board. He has attended meetings and talked to folks involved and is excited to involve himself in the process. The planning board needs membership, and having him as an alternate would be of value to the group.
And is this new, so we're just discussing tonight?
Yes, so it'll be up for a vote on the 13th.
I think we'd be lucky to have them.
Yeah, I would support that.
Okay, great. Next is the Town Center Tax Increment Financing District Advisory Board. We have 7 applicants. Want to go through the list, or how do we?
Yeah, so this is where the select board is a good problem that you have. You have more applicants than you have seats, and we have some fantastic applicants. And so obviously we don't need to make any decisions tonight, which is wonderful. But a couple of things I think the select board should do. We haven't talked in depth about alternates. And I think as a 5-member board, it will be important to have alternates. You could have 2. Given that we have 7 applicants for 4 positions, you could have 3 alternates. And so that is a determination you could make tonight if you were interested in appointing alternates. and then what process you might want to go through between now and May 13th to narrow down if you decide to have alternates, who would be full members, who would be alternates, or if you decide to have one or two alternates or just regular members, who you would appoint.
So in reviewing those applicants, I would feel comfortable that we have 3 alternates and a 5-person seated board. If anybody else would like to second that motion.
So we'll be looking for another applicant?
No, I think
No, we would
because
have
Jim
enough.
Sakosha is also going to be a member of the
Well,
team.
but is he counted as one of the 4?
Yes.
He's one of the
One
5.
of the 5.
Okay.
And so
That's
then
what
we
I
have
thought.
4 vacant seats and 7 applicants.
Okay.
And if
And
we,
before we would
Yes.
entertain that, I would just like to talk about what an alternate does. So an alternate could sit at the meeting, discuss, but would not have voting privileges unless someone was absent.
Mhm.
But they would be encouraged to participate in discussions.
Yeah,
the
that's how most of the
person,
boards
yeah,
operate.
and the person chairing would choose to bring in an alternate, either, in this particular case, in my case, I generally will choose based on longevity. If there's more than one applicant, that won't occur in this case. But certainly there could be an agreement in their bylaws that they maybe circulate all 3 alternates through, if that's possible, something to consider there. What I would think is helpful for this, reading everyone's applications, there's a wide span of expertise. And I know in the strategic planning session, there was some discussion about, wouldn't it be great to have an engineer? Wouldn't it be great to have somebody who's a land attorney? It would just be interesting if we took our strategic work and then we could even de-identify it, but just be sure that we've met those requirements for TIF by outlining each person's background that may align with those strategic needs.
Yeah, and the only other thing that stuck out to me is 2 of the applicants are Recreation Commission members. And that was not an accident. The Rec Commission talked about this and talked about the value of involving themselves in the process and being a part of the process. And so it could be that one of those members is a full member and one is an alternate, which would seem appropriate to have a balance of membership. And yeah, so are select board members interested in maybe dividing up the 7 and setting up separate conversations, maybe 10, 15-minute conversations with them to report back on for the next meeting to try to narrow down full members or alternates? We could, review the qualifications based on the strategic planning, but I think we only hit a couple of those boxes.
Okay.
So I think there'll still be gaps at that point.
Okay. It's going to be important to identify those gaps, I think.
The TIF, I understand the criteria for having a broad area of expertise, but does the TIF specifically give any categories of expertise?
Nope. So if there's a district that's created primarily for residential development, there's a requirement that one of the members live within the district. But that requirement isn't here. We have a couple of members who live within the district, which I think is valuable, even if it's not a requirement. Valuable to have membership from folks that live in the district.
Yeah, I know Rick Walker had suggested someone from the school board also being a valuable participant, given its proximity to the schools, and I think that's a good idea as well.
Yeah, so Garth Svensson, elected member of the school board, also lives within the district.
I think it would be good just to have, quick spreadsheet of what we identified, where we're still seeing gaps, and then in order to place the most appropriate members as regular seated members versus alternates, take those applications and break it out for what the strategic session had.
How do we do that between now and the next May 13th?
That's why I'm looking at Connor.
Yeah, I mean, I can pull out the relevant piece of information, send it around, kind of as like a rubric, and then maybe if you all want to set if I can commit to get that to you tomorrow, and by the following Monday, if you all could commit to getting back maybe a preference of
Seated versus
seated
alternate?
versus alternate, and then if there's additional information that anybody needs, we can flesh that out.
Excellent.
And then that would be individually, and then we can discuss it as a group on the 13th.
That sounds good.
And do we need to make a decision on the 13th? So I'm just wondering if we have conflicts, you know,
I think
after
we
we've done
should.
our scoring, then maybe that is the time to reach out and interview people.
Yeah, and I think if you send that all back to me, I can get a sense for and talk to you individually about,
About
okay, hey,
alignment.
here's the commonalities I'm finding. And I can talk to Jim as the chair about having some conversations with the individual applicants. And if there was a broad disparity in perspectives of the select board, we could have a non-public before the meeting on the 13th to discuss, we'd go into non-public for reputation and discuss any differences of thoughts or perspectives from the select board. So
Excellent.
that sounds like a good plan. But to your point about the 13th, I do think we should make a decision on the 13th
Okay.
because I'd like to get going on that. We have some grant opportunities that we're starting to work towards. And so working with the group to refine, the advisory group to refine and really develop the vision for that lot will be important. I'd like to take advantage of that
Great.
this summer.
And besides Matt, who's the other Recreation Commission member?
Fred Tester.
Okay.
Frederick Tester.
Got it.
But I was so pleased to see even a few applications with cover letters, with additional details
Yeah,
of the.
that was very
yeah.
helpful to me as I was reading.
So a great pool of candidates, and it sounds like there's support from the select board to bring them all on, and some of them as full members and some of them as alternates.
Excellent.
Great.
There are, I think, 2 vacancies on the advisory budget committee. So we'll be
Yes.
looking for applications for those.
Yeah, so I wanted to see if you all were comfortable with this process. So since we have multiple vacancies, sometimes we fill vacancies on a rolling basis. If we have a vacancy like we're doing with the planning board here, where the advisory budget committee is kind of a start and stop process, and we have a little bit of time, I think now would be a good time to advertise the vacancies and solicit applications. We got 7 for the TIF District Advisory Board. Who knows who is out there thinking, hey, I might like to get involved in town. And so what I proposed is that we advertise applications due June 5th so that we can review for discussion on the 10th and then make the appointments on the 8th. The budget process doesn't start too much after that. That would give the group an opportunity to have a meeting maybe in later July or early August to organize and think about changes to the process and discuss, like we had talked about at strategic planning, really shifting the budget process to the budget committee and then reporting back to the select board through the process. So I think we have enough time to do it that way if you all feel comfortable with that.
Sure. At the last meeting, you weren't sure if there were going to be 2 or 3 vacancies, but it sounds like maybe you've confirmed that. There's only
I've
2
confirmed that there's 2. So I have contacted, there's one member that's up for reappointment that hasn't reapplied, and I haven't been able to connect with him.
Okay.
I've reached out a couple of times. So I think the select board has traditionally handled reappointments as not necessarily competitive. If folks do good work for the committee and they want to continue, the select board has encouraged them to continue. So not having heard specifically that he isn't going to reapply, I'm not going to say that there are 3, but there may be 3.
Do you think the possibility exists for those members that are vacating their positions that they would be maybe willing one time to be part of a quick mentorship meeting where, I suppose they could accomplish the same thing by watching a taped advisory budget committee, but I think it's really helpful for new members to watch the questions that are asked, how the communication of that collaborative group occurs. So either having a session where they sit, view a meeting together, and then potentially if the past members were willing to kind of be that voice of how they discuss their communication. And
I can ask.
think
I
it
expect
could
they
be
probably would. The 2 that are definitely getting done, invested a lot of time, are very proud of their work with the budget committee. Yeah, and so I think they would be open to that. But I'll ask. It's a good suggestion. Okay, so we will advertise and follow that timeline.
Sounds good. Staff reports.
third meeting here in April, so I won't read through the work anniversaries. First quarter financial analysis is the next item. So we have, we are tracking as expected for this time during the year. A couple of things I'll point out for our budget. One, you'll remember the operating budget article was $8,998,280, but the total budget here is shown at $9,030,560. You'll remember the cost items for the collective bargaining agreement were a separate warrant article. That $32,000 is added to the operating budget. So since both of those articles passed, that's how we end up with the budget of what it is. Our expenditures track 23% or 25% through the budget. We're more ahead of schedule than that because that includes a lot of one-time expenditures that we pay in the beginning of the year, insurance and things like that. So we're farther ahead than that. The next bar chart shows the prior 3 years in many of the operating budget expense categories, departments for the most part. You'll see that there's only one that has abnormal activity in 2024, and that's financial administration and tax. That's one of those cost areas where we paid for our managed support services, our IT support services in the beginning of the year, where with the previous provider we paid monthly. And so we've made that payment, and that's why we're showing 35% expended in that category. But you'll see compared to prior years and compared to that 25% threshold, we're at or ahead of where we'd expect to be. The other very important part of a financial analysis is our revenue. So about half of our revenue is collected from non-property tax sources. And so that's what we track here. That total budgeted is $4.4 million. And to date, we've collected 21% of that, which I will tell you is ahead of schedule. And you'll wonder why we're 25% through the year and 21% is ahead of schedule. The largest portion, single portion of our locally collected revenue is state funding. So our highway block grant and the rooms and meals tax distribution. And we don't receive the lion's share of that until the fourth quarter. And so that kind of remains outstanding through the year. But I'll point out that at the same time in 2023, we had collected 18% of our budgeted revenue, and we exceeded our budget collections in 2023. So ahead of schedule on revenue collection. The last bar chart shows a few of the big categories of revenue for comparing 2022, 2023, and 2024. There's two categories that stick out here. First, interest and penalties on delinquent taxes. So members that have been on the board through COVID remember that we had a huge drop-off in the amount of delinquent taxes during COVID. Everybody was paying their taxes, whether they used their stimulus money to pay it or they spent more time at home so they cared more about paying their taxes. I don't know. But it wasn't unique to Barrington. This was across the state. And so we saw a reduction, the increase in people paying their taxes and paying their taxes on time resulted in a reduction in interest and penalties on delinquent taxes. A good problem to have because you want people paying their taxes on time. We have steadily seen that revenue category return to kind of pre-COVID times. And so it's been a little bit of a moving target to project because we didn't anticipate it to go down and we didn't know how fast it would rebound. So we're exceeding expectations in that category so far this year. The other is building permit fees. That one stands out. And this isn't a surprise. This revenue budget was prepared prior to the select board agreeing to increase building permit fees in support of funding the additional 20-hour-a-week deputy building inspector. And so we are appropriately ahead of schedule based on those decisions. So that is our expenditures and revenue to date, 25% through the year. Any questions?
The interest on delinquent taxes, do we have a way to identify which are paid by the financial institutions and may be late and which are paid directly from the taxpayers?
I'm trying to think if we have an easy way to do that. So there's two kind of categories of paid by financial institutions. There's three bulk payments that are made by the largest financial institutions. We actually work directly with them. We send them a pay file of all of their accounts and they pay us direct. And so it's easier for them to process. We get the money cleaner and faster, and everything lines up.
And we
There
don't
are-
generally have them paying late, is what I'm hearing.
Oh, no,
Okay.
definitely not. But there are a lot of smaller financial institutions that just kind of pay like regular taxpayers. So there's no easy way to pull them out separate.
Okay.
We also, the select board has afforded the tax collector the ability to waive interest up to $10. And that generally gives a grace period for the first few days to a week after a tax bill being due. So if an escrow company makes a late payment or a property owner directly, that interest is usually waived before there's any interest or penalties on the account. So the tax
That's
collector
helpful.
appreciates that flexibility because it makes it a lot easier. Imagine going to pay your tax bill a day late. Oh, sorry, the check you just made out, I need $2.05 more.
I would think the time, the energy, and the
Precisely.
stamp would be absorbing any additional interest in those situations.
Any other questions on the financial analysis?
Looks good.
Okay.
We're right
Thanks
on
for the
target.
clarity.
Absolutely. So training opportunities, they're the same as they were last week. And Municipal Office Administrator Connell.
We have two things if you could sign tonight. One of them is for each of you to sign the proclamation that was approved last meeting. I think it's floating over that way somewhere. That's for the Municipal Clerks Week, which is next week.
Excellent.
And then Vice Chair, if you could sign the poll attachment. That would be great for tonight. And then on Thursday, you can expect, who knows what else will show up, but 2 oaths of office approved during the consent agenda and 10 land use change tax bills and warrants. That's 20 different items just right there.
No.
Hey, going on to old business.
Ready for old business.
All right. First item is acquisition of town lot center map, 239, lot 7.
Time for a vote. So this is the end of a 6-week process, and we've got a proposed motion there. We had 2 public hearings. It was reviewed by the Conservation Commission and Planning Board, and this authorizes the town to acquire the town center lot approved by voters, map 239, lot 7.
Excellent. So I would make a motion to acquire map 239, lot 7, under the terms presented by RSA 41:14-A, as approved by the voters on March 12th, 2024, recommended by the Conservation Commission on March 14th of 2024, recommended by the Planning Board on March 19th of 2024.
I second that.
Question?
No, sir.
Roll call.
I think it's time to vote.
Hardikoff, aye.
Capiello, aye.
Gibson, aye.
Awesome. Thank you.
Let's buy some land.
Okay. Second item of old business is the Ayers Lake boat launch design.
Yeah, so continuing this conversation from last week, as you know, there were a few pieces of information from meetings, and the select board had some questions. So I updated the materials with some notes from some meetings on Friday, and then a couple of meetings today that I'll provide updates from also. I do want to point out, because it was brought to my attention that the Ayers Lake Association was concerned with the language, and let me just find it here. In 9, old business, B, Ayers Lake boat launch design, the little 2 where it says, among other suggestions, the groups advocated for a formally established launching area consistent with the provisions governing state-controlled boat launches. That's found in RSA 233A. As they explained, this could help address the erosion and stormwater runoff concerns. I think there's concern that the Ayers Lake Association board felt like that made it sound like they wanted a boat launch there. And so in all of these conversations, I've attached their full letter from 2022, so folks could maintain that background of everything that they were asking for. I think the language I think I was referring to there's a part of the letter that says best practices for the stewardship of the lake would be to treat the Daniel Cater Road boat launch in accordance with DES guidance and in accordance with how Fish and Game treats state-controlled boat launches under RSA 233A and the administrative rules promulgated under the statute. So I didn't mean to misrepresent their perspective, but I just wanted to clarify that.
Did we receive a formal letter from that group in reference to that? In addition to the other letters that we've read, but.
Yeah, I got a note from the Ayers Lake Association president who said, hey, I just want to, basically make it clear that the association board was not asking for a boat launch.
I did watch portions of your last meeting, even though I was absent, so that I would get myself up to date on what occurred.
Great. So following up from that, the couple of comments that the select board had from the last meeting were one about the vegetative buffer and two about the opportunity either with the statutory framework to restrict the access to car top boats only and as it related to the grant. So those were kind of the two primary focuses for some of these conversations, but we talked about many other things also. So on April 25th, met with the Conservation Commission. So part of the purpose of that meeting is they sent a separate letter back in 2022 asking for improvements to this area. So this was an opportunity to get the plans in front of them and facilitate a conversation there. Also, part of the permitting framework for a permit by notification, it's a 25-day waiting period where you submit, the Department of Environmental Services responds in 25 days. During that time, there's feedback and review and things like that. If the Conservation Commission signs the application, that review time is reduced. And so in addition, at the Conservation Commission meeting, I asked if they supported the project, they could vote to sign the permit by notification and reduce that waiting period, but it wasn't necessary. Ultimately, they did make a motion to sign, and that failed 4-1. But as part of that conversation, there was discussion about what concerns the Conservation Commission members had about the project so that I could bring that back to the select board. And as I included in the town administrator report, there was concerns about erosion control, permanent erosion control, which was similar to Select Person Capiello's question about the vegetative buffer and kind of long-term stability of that slope. There was a concern that parking problems would increase and that there were inadequate plans to address invasive species. So that was the feedback from the Conservation Commission members. Similarly, or actually on the next morning, not too long after, that was a night meeting, we had our pre-application meeting with the Department of Environmental Services. So this obviously isn't the first time we talked to them. This process started with DES, so we could understand the permitting framework for the proposed project before we even applied for the grant. So Calvin Diesner was familiar with the project, had reviewed all the site photos and the site specifically, but this was his first time seeing the draft plans, the same plans that the select board saw. And that meeting went great. He and on behalf of the department were satisfied with the plans as presented for making improvements. There was a couple of pieces of feedback. The dock, you remember the dock was presented option 1 on one side of the ramp, option 2 on the other side of the ramp. I had noted in the materials for the last meeting that having it on the Camp Fireside side of the ramp would require approval from Camp Fireside. That seemed to be a better place to put it because it followed the contour of the land and kind of didn't obstruct the waterway. One of the things that DES pointed out is that there's a separate requirement in the statute about a property line extending kind of in an imaginary way across the lake and maintaining 6 feet boat traffic 6 feet away from that property line. And so he said you'd be much better off just to put the dock on the other side of the ramp, and it was already listed as an option in the plan. That's not a heavy lift. It was actually originally designed there, and then they were looking at it and say, hey, it might be better here. So that was one recommendation, put the ramp there, not a big deal. We talked about permitting and the permit by notification process. They were comfortable that was an appropriate permitting framework for the project, acknowledging that it's an existing ramp that is being improved within the footprint, and the adding of this dock is separate permitting as well. We also used the opportunity to talk about that roadside vegetative buffer. And he was quick to acknowledge that that no permitting was required for anything there because roadside maintenance doesn't require permitting, even on a lakeside. This is shoreline permitting from the state. And we acknowledged that we understood, but we sought his feedback for how we could balance maintaining an open roadway and providing more opportunity for people to get off the side with maintaining the slope and having some vegetative buffer. And kind of a novel suggestion, but hadn't really thought about an in-between. He suggested that it could just be partially trimmed, right? So trim back the side on the roadside and maintain vegetation on the lakeside. And one drawback to that is it will require more ongoing maintenance, not like a one-time mow down, anything that's, too high. It will kind of require it to be manicured a little bit better. So you maintain, vegetation, and then cut it back. And what the road agent explained when I talked to him about it, that's what they had basically been doing anyways, prior to the 2021, 2022. And so he wasn't worried that it would be a tremendous amount of extra work for them to maintain that, but maintaining some level of vegetation to keep the slope stable, but also allow the road to be wider. So that was a good suggestion that came as part of that conversation with DES. Trying to see if there were any other notes that came from that conversation. Any questions before I continue? Okay. There's a question about RSA 271:20/A. So you remember the town attorney's opinion shared by DES actually is that the town cannot restrict all access to the lake from Daniel Cater Road because of this statute. And there was a question if restricting it to like hardtop boats only would be a violation of that statute or not. Town attorney's opinion is probably not. The challenge with the statute is there's no case law, so there's no like examples of what this is. She actually went to try to find some legislative intent because she was curious about the topic, and it was established back in 1990. The archives provided all of the committee reports and doesn't really give a lot of insight to legislative intent either. She did caution that because it's a state-funded project, it would be important to consult with the granting agency to make sure that they didn't have concerns that a restriction would violate the state statute because, the state doesn't want to fund a project that's, I said, hey, that's a great idea. We'll check with their lawyers too. So that was a conversation with the town's attorney. So today, in the order that it happened, I met with the Camp Fireside Executive Director to talk about the parking area. We don't need to get into a lot of details here, and I think the headline from that meeting was kind of regardless of what happens, it will be a good idea to have a more formalized plan for the parking in front of the Camp Fireside Beach.
So that's to be developed.
Yeah, so in my mind, it's like a memorandum of agreement between Camp Fireside as an organization and the town as the owner of that parking area. We had some good conversations about where the gate access points are and how it's best to, the best flow of traffic and, where people should park, whether or not there should be separate reserved parking stalls. And none of that, there's no formal agreement between the town and Camp Fireside now, so it seems like a good idea to formalize something. And it was a good opportunity to bring up the conversation, but like I said, I think that conversation can happen regardless. And I think both Camp Fireside and the town are of the opinion that no trailered parking should be allowed in that parking area, which is kind of what facilitated the conversation. And so it seems like there'll be some good opportunities for that, and to establish some parking signage that the police department is able to enforce. So parking rules set by the select board that the police department can enforce to make sure items down there are orderly. And then the last conversation I had was with the Governor's Office for Resource Recovery. So the two questions, I actually asked a third question, which I'll just touch on. It's moot because it's not going to be allowed. But the first question was about the statutory framework, and Lawyers are great, right? Because, oh, well, we're not in a position to provide an opinion about that. And I said, okay, I just want to make sure that you wouldn't object if somebody said, hey, this is, there's this state statute, you're funding this project. He said, no, I'm, not worried about that. So he shared the town attorney's perspective that statute, as long as there is recreational public access, that the, limits on that access wouldn't be a violation of the statute, an apparent violation of the statute. And so then the conversation moved to the funding and a reduced boat ramp. And he said that the proposal, the grant was for improvements to a boat ramp, and trailered boats take access here, and not allowing trailered boats wouldn't be improvements. So it would no longer be improving a boat ramp, and it wouldn't be funded. And so if the ramp were not able to accommodate small trailered boats, then we're not eligible for the grant funding that we have in place. So that, I believe, is most of the additional information that the select board asked for. And I mentioned to the chair before the meeting started, as far as timeline, the topic was listed for a vote tonight, and part of that was because of the timeline of the project and staying on track to meet the project timelines and the grant timelines, and not waiting until the May 13th. Given that there's a 3-member board, I feel like probably it would be better to make a decision with a 5-member board. I would put it up to you all, but just something to consider. And to the point about not making a decision until May 13th, that would definitely put us behind the ball a little bit on moving the project forward. And so we would need to make a confident decision and move forward in that direction at that time. But it's really a pretty small project. As part of the process, I talked to Fish and Game about their boat launches. They do all of them in-house. The engineer believes confidently that the highway department could install this ramp. It's all precast planks. The road agent doesn't have a lot of experience installing the cofferdam sandbags to keep the disturbed water from flowing into the lake. And so he was thinking, it'd be better to hire it out. But it's a pretty small project. And so making a decision May 13th would put us behind a little bit, but I think we could do it if the select board wanted to have a full board to make the decision. Happy to answer questions, yeah.
So I've been doing a little bit of research since I watched the last meeting. 78 of 1,000 bodies of water in the state have experienced invasive milfoil. What I have not been able to drill down, and I'm hoping to find this answer, is how many of those 78 have public access? How many of those 78 do not have public access? And I'd like to know how many of the 78 have been able to recover from that invasive species. I think these are important forms of data in order to make an educated decision.
And I can connect, I've talked to her a few times before, but the invasive species specialist at the Department of Environmental Services, and ask these or other questions if you have them.
Yeah, I think those would help me to make an educated decision.
I have a list of each lake in the town that's in.
Yeah, does it say whether there's whether there's public access?
Doesn't mention the access, but it's a good starting point.
And then I think one of the other things that would be important is, and I don't know how easy this is to gather, but how many boats with motors are actually registered to owners on that shoreline? No way to gather that.
It's the state's data, so we actually register boats now. We kind of have access to the data in the system, but it's illegal to access that data. It's
okay, well, please don't do that then. No, I wouldn't want to. Okay.
Yeah.
Can you request the state to release that data?
I can ask. They generally don't.
No, that's actually helpful to us.
I'm more familiar with motor vehicle data requests for release of data than I am boat registration data, but I'll ask. Yeah.
And then the one other thing in listening to some of the discussions, what would the difference be, and again, I'm not a boater, so I don't know, the difference between, when you use a paddle boat and you're paddling along and there's the potential to pull up vegetation from that. Is there a limitation to the size of the boat that would be allowed on those 12-foot ramps? And is the size of a paddle board close to the size of a prop that you'd see on those smaller motorized boats? I think these are things I don't necessarily understand as a non-boater.
I can ask the invasive species specialist.
I think
And
those
I
things
think it's more of a question of what gets brought into the lake on the trailer
right, but
than bringing.
do you know anybody who looks at a paddle board underneath side and pays attention to what's attached there?
It's pretty obvious.
It is?
Yeah, you've got a
See,
paddle.
this is what I'm saying.
I mean, you look at it. I mean, I think it's pretty obvious.
It's underneath them? Okay.
Yeah.
I think she's talking about a pedal boat, not a paddle board.
Oh yeah, I own a paddle board.
Oh.
I'm talking about a pedal boat that you, was I saying paddle instead of pedal? I'm sorry.
I think, I think.
We're in Massachusetts, sorry.
So a sense for decision-making or other comments or questions?
I personally need all that information to make,
Yeah.
an education. I mean,
And obviously we were short last meeting also, so.
So a couple of things, and I think those are reasonable questions, Tracy. I don't know if this information would be available, but you talked about how ponds and lakes responded to treatment, but also the cost of that treatment, because I think that's a pretty significant cost to treat the lake for treatment. A new piece of information that I just heard tonight is that if we went with car top only, we would lose this grant. So we would be back to square one.
with no recreational public access.
Well, it would be what it is now, which is really what the lake doesn't want. So, and I also as I was kind of struggling with, before I even had that information about, hey, we're being asked to limit boats for the public to car top, yet we have a responsibility that everybody owns the lakes to have that access. So in that tension, as I'm trying to figure out where I want to sit, I wondered if the Ayers Lake Association and the business on Ayers Lake are looking at least to the future about limiting boats to car tops in general on the lake. That might help me with that tension.
I can pose that question to the association.
Yeah, because I don't think the association president.
The Ayers Lake Campground, are people that are staying there allowed to bring boats into the water from Ayers Lake Campground?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah,
so motorboats are already accessing the lake if they're paid stayers at the campground. Stayers, is that a word? Is stayers even a word?
So I'm not necessarily hearing restrictions being imposed on like Ayers Lake Campground. In fact, in the summer when you go by there, all of the boats and trailers that fill the yard there are coming and going, and restrictions aren't being asked of them or the homeowners. It's only to the public, and I feel that's not fair access thing, especially to a lake that is state-owned under public trust for people. I'm very sensitive to the fact of protecting it, and I think there are a lot of things that can be done to protect. I mean, the signage, the what's there now. I mean, you've seen, I drove by again this weekend. It's a mess, and we've heard from the Lake Association for years how it's poorly constructed. It causes erosion, and the correct way to fix that is to install a proper ramp to prevent that erosion. And it may even also, right now, it's kind of, I mean, the road is it's narrow. It's not safe for passing by. You know, this whole project would correct a lot of the issues that have been presented. I understand there's the milfoil concern, but there are so many other issues and concerns that have been presented over the years that this plan really helps to address.
Okay.
So, and I'm not saying how I'm going to vote on it yet, but if it were voted that we would do the plan, Can we restrict that parking? I mean, you know, you two probably know the lay of the land better. I mean, how many pickup trucks with a trailer could you reasonably put there? 3?
Right, and I've had some.
Limit that parking space and have that be patrolled.
Yeah, and I'll make a note because I think it would be helpful to talk in specifics about the availability of parking, how much space we have. I've had some preliminary conversations with the police chief and the fire chief as it relates to other access and what could be enforced down there. That conversation, led to a conversation about Young Road and the Swains Lake boat launch. And the police department has had reasonable success in doing targeted enforcement of folks not parking where they should, and really curtailing that. If folks know they're going to be towed or ticketed for parking where they shouldn't be, they stop parking there. And so what I'll do is I'll go out there. I can go out there with the chief and look at the location and the project extents and get an idea for how much space we think will be available and get an idea of, how many cars with trailers is that and what does that mean for enforcement? Is that kind of where you're going with that?
Yes, and the comment last week, I think it was either the police chief or fire chief, that by limiting some parking already, they had seen a 50% reduction of boats on the lake. So could you just
that was
statement?
I think a resident from the lake. So the Camp Fireside had put up some signs in the beach parking area saying no trailer parking, and I think those signs are far enough down the fence that an honest passerby might see that and say, oh, maybe I shouldn't launch my boat in this access area. Although there still have been plenty of boats and trailers there.
So 2 more questions I'd like to see. Do we have, with New Hampshire boating, do we have like adjacent state recognition that if you have a Vermont boater's license, you can come boat on a New Hampshire lake using that boating license so that, you're cross-pollinating water from other states? Is that not a possible? Again, I know nothing about boating, so I really need to.
The better question is for the unlicensed boaters that want to rent boats. This is the fascinating intersection of a tourism state and a live free or die state.
As you know, Ossipee has a couple of rental.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, wait. So you're required to take a test in a class to get a license, but your friend from Massachusetts can come up and get a 3-day pass with his boat rental
with a 5-day, with a 5-second. Yeah. So I'm curious about that and how that would reduce the numbers.
So you're wondering reciprocity for boating licenses.
So yeah.
Okay.
As opposed to our 1,000 bodies of water, what is the cross-pollination from other states that could potentially occur? And then can we get a number from Ayers Lake Campground of the number of, what is it when you stay at a campground? Campers that bring their boats in.
And they're not required to share that,
but they might. I mean, they might comfortably say, we only see, 10 boats go in each season. I think that would give us a better perspective of what the body of water is currently already experiencing.
Annual camper number of boats.
Since they're not necessarily part of it. And is the campground part of the Lake Association? Okay.
I think the nature of the current spot it is very limiting in and of itself. I mean, the road, the size, even going with a 12-foot ramp is a very tiny ramp.
Mm-hmm.
And we know, and we can certainly put signage and emphasize that end of the lake is only 3 feet deep. And it's not.
You're going to rip your motor off your boat? Is that what I'm
hearing?
Yeah,
it might not float on the trailer, right? The bigger boat.
I think most people, and the limited parking, really, I mean, we restricted parking by the Fireside Beach with limited parking along the road. You can only get a couple of vehicles there, even pulled over on the side. And so at any one time, you don't have, to my knowledge, more than 1 or 2. But I think more and more what I'm seeing and hearing from people that I know that go to the lake are they're kayakers. And I like kayaking, canoeing. And, as much as you can encourage those people to go to that lake, which I think there's a growing interest, they kind of take the 2 or 3 parking spots that are there, right?
Okay, understood.
I don't know that the risk or concern, which I believe is real about milfoil, outweighs the the access and this opportunity to have a grant that will fund and repair the erosion and concerns that the association has been expressing over the, trying to weigh the risks and what sense for the greatest good. I think, I think in the coming, before our next meeting, we can think and talk about that.
Yeah, I would definitely like to.
Or actually, we can't talk about that, but we can.
We can't talk about it, but we can
I
gather
have a
data.
list. Town hall is going to be closed between now and May 13th. We're going to get answers to these questions. Another idea that I had, which we'll just do, because I noticed that the fire chief doesn't have any homework here. But you know what the fire chief has? A boat in the fire department. It would actually be interesting to take that small boat and at the Swains Lake boat ramp, at a depth where the ramp is 3 feet deep.
Oh, and test it.
And show that boat and that small boat and trailer at a 3 foot depth at that ramp, to get a sense of scale for the limits, the maximum limits of the
That would be
proposed
helpful,
boat ramp.
because I kept struggling with that and asking voters, like, how big a boat
Yeah.
is this?
Yeah.
Now going to go on here if we can only have 3
I think
feet.
one of the
And it
most,
got quite a
yeah.
range of.
oh, again, I would be going, I don't know. I have
Too
no
bad we
idea.
didn't think about that for today,
So my
because I'm
children-
sure without any fire calls, that would have been a great activity for the firefighters on a
Yes.
70-degree day. Hey, can you go take a yardstick? Sorry, Tracy. go ahead.
No, before we move to next section or public comment again, my children attended Fireside, and when they bring the kids down to the water, they walk along that roadway. And so ensuring, as this is built out, if we have the dollars for this, but just ensuring that as the kids are crossing and moving to that body of water to get to their beach, I think that that's also of utmost importance.
When you say money,
It's not even just signage,
Oh, okay.
like if you're parking here to bring your boat in, be mindful that within, a quarter of a mile is a large camp run all summer long with access to this beach area, just to remind people to be looking out for the kids.
Could we talk a little bit about the culvert projects on Pond Hill? And I think that's probably part of our capital improvement plan, but let's just talk about that.
I have fantastic news, a little finger post for the May 13th meeting. So we finally unlocked the grant funds for the design of that project. So FEMA has culvert replacement funds available for certain projects. And some of these federal funding programs recognize that making a competitive application is difficult for smaller entities. So they make available planning money, basically, to allow you to prepare a competitive application. So one of the benefits of receiving a planning application is that they recognize that you have a likely contender for an application. And so we received a grant of $42,000 with a 25% match for engineering of that entire project.
Excellent.
And we actually received that grant, for those that have been on the board for a little while, a couple years ago. FEMA and Homeland Security Emergency Management at the state level has had staffing issues, and our review of our hazard mitigation plan was caught up in those delays. And in order to actually have the funds released to you, you have to have an up-to-date emergency operations manual, hazard mitigation plan. And so it was, 2 years, I think 2 full years from when we were told your project has been awarded. But now, Homeland Security Emergency Management, they have some new staff. They're responsive. They're great. They got it done. We have a grant agreement in my inbox. We have, it's already been noticed in the paper, our public hearing for October, our next meeting. And we will be collecting that money and dispatching the engineers to go and design the project that they proposed over 2 years ago.
Then we have to then go back and apply for more money.
Yeah, so that will be part of the process. Part of what that grant will pay for is designing the project and applying for that grant, that round for FEMA funding for the project. And so no matter what, we end up with a design out of the deal And we also have the opportunity for grant funding for the entire project.
And in your experience, if they fund the design, do they look favorably around?
Yes. It's not guaranteed, but they look favorably. You will notice this year, and this was in the paving update from the road agent, we are doing some paving work on that S-curve because it's so deteriorated. Motorcycles love to drive through there, and it's a safety concern. So we're doing some paving improvements on the S-curves of Pond Hill Road, kind of in advance of that. Some of it might be interrupted when we do the big project, but sometimes.
Yeah, I was just looking for the listing. It may have come from the Ayers Lake Association about the various issues that come from the culvert. So will that resolve all of them?
Yeah, I believe so, yes. I think the one that is not likely to be resolved with that project, although may be improved, is the highway department uses a lot of salt on that hill and on the S-curves. Have to, because it's steep and it ices up and it's dangerous to not have it be black pavement. And so the road agent has explored some alternatives, but nothing that matches the safety threshold required. And so there has been and will continue to be high salt use on the hill going up to Camp Fireside and the S-curves going up to 202. And that drains down and ultimately ends up in Ayers Lake. The highway department for years hasn't used any salt on the gravel roads, including Daniel Cater Road. But we have a similar problem on Young Road, all of the causeways, the curves around there. And, the road agent has done a lot of great work to include trying treated salt. Turns out treated salt isn't better because they treat it with glucose, which.
We read that report.
Yeah. So the,
Which is encourages.
So, and what.
Cyanobacteria growth.
Mark got some interesting feedback from some state partners about salting around the lake, specifically Young Road along Swains Lake. And yes, the salt use does have an adverse effect on the lake, but one car going off the road and crashing into the lake with the oil and the gas would likely have a tenfold negative impact on the lake compared to the cumulative salt use. And so there really aren't a lot of great alternatives for Young Road or for Pond Hill Road up the hills. So off the top of my head, recalling the concerns for the culverts and the runoff, that project would address most of them, but probably not the salt use.
All right, thanks for that update.
Mm-hmm.
For point of order, wanted to pass that down, chairperson.
I think so. I think so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Look at the second sheet that I circled. It indicates no on the goals. No, give me that back. Look at what I circled there in reference to the goals.
Oh, okay.
I'm always hyper vigilant about that, not because I'm here, but other.
Yeah. Let's see where our next. Done with old business.
Yeah, we're gonna put a pin in that. We'll bring it back. Old business for a vote.
On the full board or
Well,
more than
and
three.
I feel like we generated so much questioning here that it would be really helpful.
I agree.
I need info and data and info and data and info and data.
I'm your guy. Okay, great.
And I think for many of us, getting that information that if we do kayak only, the grant is.
Do we make a motion to move the vote or?
Nope.
Fine. Okay.
Nope.
Great.
I can just leave it.
Okay. Any new business?
No new business.
Okay. Select member reports and concerns.
Starting with me?
Yeah.
Okay, so we had a very extremely robust zoning meeting. We had approval of a commercial and 2 residential home lots in order to preserve some, I think, very important wetlands. It was granted. We had an approval for disturbing the greenway of 50 feet along 125, but not necessarily removing the 50 feet of greenway. That was approved, and that will be bringing forward an expansion of a light manufacturing building, to the planning board for review. We had a special, we had an approval for special exception. Basically, mobile home station had been placed incorrectly and when sort of, it was inches. But anyway, it was approved. So it was a very busy evening and a month ago we had a hearing request that pushed forward till we will see the board.
Are you in need of more members?
We could use some alternates on zoning, certainly. It's a, yeah. We do have some new members, but certainly probably 2 to 3 alternates would be really helpful. We had some in the queue, and I think they gave thought to the amount of energy. So it'd be nice to have some people step up so we could advertise for zoning board alternates. Sure.
Mhm.
So planning board did not meet since our last visit here, although we will in May 7th. And I have heard, I have not had a chance to look at it, that the Young Road subdivision, which is on the agenda for 7th, will come in as a.
Okay. Last Monday I was at a meeting, so I was not here to give an update on the library building committee held their energy charrette on the 15th. Then the building committee met days later on the 18th. Both of those went well. Things are moving along there. I don't have major updates there. However, the library building committee has moved all of their upcoming meetings to 5 o'clock, which I appreciate. Better than earlier in the day. And those are going to fall on May 16th, June 6th, and June 27th. Energy committee met last week. One of the new things that they're working on is working with the school SAU to figure out energy efficiencies and opportunities for saving there, which I'm excited to hear. We discussed the library and energy efficiencies around the new library, town hall solar, community power. On May 8th here in the town hall meeting room, there'll be a public meeting for the public to learn more about, ask any questions they have about how community power is going to be rolled out. And
on that topic, really quick, residents are getting letters from the Community Power Coalition of New Hampshire with information about community power, which was approved by voters at the town meeting election. So they may ask you about it. It is legitimate. We have information on our website. We'll push information out on social media as well. And yeah, so it's 6:30 here, public forum. It'll be available online also. Information to join is on the town's website and will be on Facebook. And yeah, like Robin said, any questions you have. So that's May 8th, Wednesday, May 8th, 6:30 here. Didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, it's great. Thank you.
Anytime somebody sends letters to all the residents, select board members end up getting questions. So
yep. That's about all I have for that. So we're on to the next public comment session, the last one of the evening.
Hi, Ron St. James, Small Road. One more thing on the boat launch. That launch as it exists now limits who uses the launch. Some people look at that and they say, no, I don't want to ruin my trailer or my boat by putting it in there. So that, that reduces traffic a little bit. Having a lovely launch is gonna increase traffic. Increased traffic increases risk of infestation of invasives. That's what we're concerned about. As we said before, remediation costs about $1,000 an acre for treatment. Ayers Pond is 228 acres, just for reference. You may not have to treat the whole thing, but you do have to treat year after year after year. Usually you don't eradicate an invasive species. You can limit them, but they keep coming back. So this is a big risk. And I'm thinking if you go forward with this project, is there some way and I don't know if the vehicle is correct, but to create like a fund of some sort, capital reserve fund maybe, to assist not only our body of water, but any body of water that gets an infestation, because that is a huge amount of money for any group of residents to have to come up with year after year after year to do these treatments. Waterfront people pay a lot of taxes, and that's going to have a big impact if more bodies of water have this infestation. And just to say a couple things about Ayers Lake Campground, I'm not speaking for them, but they do have their own boat launch facility. They have a hose there for washing the boats. They have a bunch of boats, but pretty much all their campers are there by season. They're not coming and going day by day. So there's not a lot of in and out traffic and hopping from lake to lake. They're pretty much there for the season. So I don't think they're a big risk. But people coming in for the day are. So, I hope you can keep that risk in mind. This is putting a lot of weight on those of us that live there and try to care for the lake. So, it's a lot of responsibility on you guys. I wouldn't want to be in your shoes. But if you'll just keep our concerns in mind, we appreciate it. Thanks.
Can I ask a question? Could you add this to the list? So if the board voted to restrict to car tops only, we would be back to square zero. So could you ask the president of the Ayers Lake Association if they would be able to kayak part of it?
Mm-hmm.
And how, just all the legalities of that, how it, public access.
So the 4 to 6 foot launch with the dock and the assisted kayak launch, like the cost of that. Right. Okay.
Perhaps this brings forward a question to my understanding that there's been some change in ownership with Ayers Campground.
I don't believe that there's been a change of ownership.
Okay, management perhaps. I saw something posted where they were moving to allowing tenting in campground, whether that's gone before planning board or no. And I say that because I saw it posted on a Facebook page. If that change,
we were looking at the driveway access.
Okay.
I don't remember that we were looking at tenting.
So my point in asking this is it will be important to ask the new management if there is a change in their model from a seasonal perspective to weekly or I think that has an impact as well.
So years ago, they always had tenting. So they had a tenting, but I don't know that does that mean that they're not allowed to resume it? Or
I don't really know how it works.
I believe
think
most
if you
of
change your business model at all, you have to go.
I think there was preliminary conversation with the planning board. Maybe it was a design review about a subdivision relative to the cottages, maybe breaking the, I don't think that there's been anything.
Driveway coming into the building.
That's right.
The driveway access is a thing. I think they're coming back.
Okay, I will ask Ayers Lake Campground about tenting and how that changes the transient number of annual boats.
I think these are important questions. I'm sorry.
You don't have to apologize, no.
Under old business, can I ask a quick question about something else?
We're still in public comment.
Oh, sorry.
You can do that now, or if you want to do it after public comment closes, maybe. Is that okay?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, Tiff. To write it down so I don't forget. Sorry to interrupt. I'm sorry, what was your name, sir?
Which access do you? That's not accessible. Yeah.
The dam, it's down by the dam.
Yeah,
If you're in the lake.
Talking about trying to be.
Sir, that's the ramp that the select board is exploring making improvements to, not to expand. Well, because of that access is unimproved, the road and the shoreline, every time people go in and out, erodes into the lake. And that's adverse to the environment. And so what the proposal is, the plans are online, I can get you a copy if you'd like, but just puts 12-foot concrete planks along that ramping surface. So when people go in and out, it's not eroding constantly. So it maintains, the lake doesn't get any deeper there, you know, those same small fishing boats that people are launching there. But it makes it better for the environment that constant erosion isn't happening. But that's the site that's a proposal, and it's grant funded with a $100,000 grant from the state. This is some of the ARPA funds that the governor's office made available. Thanks for coming out. Public comment? Anybody online? Person? Okay.
Okay, close public comment.
Tracy had some.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, Tracy, you had something now?
Was the director of the recreation department also going to be part of the TIF district advisory board?
What we talked about was that absolutely she would be there for all the meetings just like I would be, but wouldn't take one of those advisory board seats.
Okay.
Yep. So we talked about that for other staff as
Yeah.
well. And that's where we landed at the strategic planning
Okay.
session.
That's what see,
As
this
only
is
a-
why I need a refresh on the strategic planning session, because that will certainly help shape. Okay, thank you.
At the last meeting, I just want to zero in on that refresh of the strategic planning. At the last meeting, we reviewed the minutes that did an overview from that session and the results. We instituted some of the recommended changes from Select Person Capiello on 5-year goals, adjusting some of the 3-year goals to 5-year goals. I asked the select board at the time, but I'll ask now since the two of you that weren't here last meeting are here, if there's anything specific that you'd like to do to maintain exposure to the strategic planning, the goals we've set through the process.
Yeah, I think regular review of them. I think we mentioned before, even if they're, spoken, but listen, on the administrative report, quarterly or something, so that we can remember these are our goals. And we
Yeah,
can,
I mean, your strategic plan is a live working document, and so I think that the chair is correct. If we don't revisit those, and quarterly, I think is probably appropriate. Maybe even twice a year, because we're going to be focused on the 1-year goals, but looking forward to what we need for the 3-year. So maybe even twice annually. I don't have an opinion about that.
Almost
Joyce.
quarterly. I'm thinking, one of the things we talked about was having a committee to look at interconnectivity, trails, and we haven't addressed that yet because we've had
That's true.
other commissions to get.
But if we realize, if it on that list that we're not talking about or dealing with any of those things, we can say, okay, on the next, let's have so and so come in and give an update.
Yeah, I like that. So, and what the question
quarterly,
was at the last meeting was basically what format or what fit and finish you'd like those revisits. What we talked about at the last meeting was more frequently than quarterly, like almost on a every meeting having a component which addressed that. We didn't zero in on specifically how we would do it, but I will integrate that as a component of the town administrator report for the May meeting, and you can just give me feedback. Hey, more or less, and yeah, because I think like last year as an example, we did really well last year addressing all of our 1-year goals and starting to lay the groundwork for our 3-year goals, and we did it without constantly checking back in and saying, oh, we're doing this. Okay, check that in the checkbox. Like, oh, we're doing this. We just did it because we did our strategic planning kind of later in the year, and we
Right.
developed a 44 question warrant. And we didn't have time to think about what we were doing. We just had time to do what we were doing. So now that we did our strategic planning so much earlier in the process, I think taking a more measured approach to tracking our progress and revisiting those will be beneficial. So I'll work up something for the May town administrator report, and then you can just provide feedback as appropriate.
Maybe a Gantt chart so that we can be, especially for the 1 year, so that we can be following the action steps that are needed in order to meet that 1 year goal would be helpful.
Okay.
Other discussion?
No, sir.
Okay, motion to adjourn.
I move that we adjourn tonight's meeting.
And there's nothing non-public.
Nothing non-public.
I enthusiastically second that.
Okay. Roll call.
Hardikoff, aye.
Happy LOI.
It's not.